That was what I that's what I wrote
Wow.
when I was sitting at Joyce's grave back
Oh my
in
God.
May 1993. So that says it all about my perspective on Joyce. Memorable conversation about Bloom
Mhm.
was at the Joyce Symposium in Hungary. What we did while we were there is the organizers organized a bus tour to Szombathely, which is where Rudolf Virag was born,
Wow. Okay.
his father.
Mhm.
Uh, and so we go to on this bus tour to this little, I don't know, it'll be a relatively small town. It's organized. It's like we are visiting dignitaries and like a festival, and they have the local orchestra plays songs
What?
and we're welcomed like VIPs to this little town. And so the conversation that we had amongst ourselves is, so we're going on a tour to the fictional home of the fictional father of a fictional character, and they're celebrating us as real people who are celebrating the fictional home of the fictional father of a fictional character, but are totally excited about the fact that all these foreigners and these distinguished intellectuals, blah blah,
Yeah.
are coming to visit Zombate. And it was, it was the craziest
Wow.
thing of this sort of meta discussion. We're
Wow.
wandering, sort of saying, well, this could be where Rudolf Virag lived, but you know he wasn't real, right? There's a discussion about the surreality of of us. It was bizarre. I'm
That's
sure Joyce never. And the weird thing was, we were all saying to ourselves, I know Joyce never came here. I don't know why, I don't know why he chose Zombate as being the home of Rudolf Virag, but there were some lovely flowers which we commented on. And anyway, so
wow.
that was the most memorable Bloom discussion because it was with my wife and all kinds of other spouses of the Joyce in-laws, as they're known at the conferences,
Oh wow.
um, who know nothing or care nothing about Joyce, but they go for the symposium
Yeah.
or
Oh wow.
go for the trip, but not for the symposium per se. And
Mhm.
they're all sort of going, okay, we'll go.
Why not? I go
Oh,
check it out.
I'll take a tour of a nice little Hungarian town. Even
Even if Rudolph Virag doesn't mean anything
who
to
the
you.
hell is Rudolph Virag? Who the hell is Leopold Bloom? If anybody asks me, why are you here? And I say, I'm just with my husband or with her. Oh.
Who
So
knows? Oh, that's
where
fascinating.
it was fun and silly all at once.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly meaningful in a weird way. Just that, just that, you know, somebody this fictional was so important as to be visitable, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, I love
You
that.
know, that something so and extraordinary could foster this sort of fascination, even with the most minute of Joyceana, in this case,
Mhm.
visiting the hometown of a fictional character, one that the author had never visited. So,
Wow.
at least to my knowledge, he never went to Hungary. He may have. I wrote a little piece on, Facebook or somewhere, Instagram, um, on February 2nd,
Okay.
which was the 100th, well, you know, the big day.
Mhm.
And I won't, well, I could read from it, but I won't bother. It was that I said I never had any knowledge. I never studied James Joyce. I never studied it, high school, university, anywhere.
Okay.
I knew about it in a tangential way, but more in the sense of this is, you know, an extraordinarily difficult modernist writer, and you know, so you could put it under Kafka or Camus or Virginia Woolf or Ford Madox Ford, all of whom I'd read, but I never read Joyce.
Okay.
And so and I remember doing I did a sketch. I draw, I write, and I draw. I write now is what I do, but I used to write, notes and novels and stuff. And I was drawing something, and I drew a picture of a self-portrait of myself. For my grandmother, because she wanted one, and so I did. And then I titled it with apologies to James Joyce, because it was a self-portrait of the artist as a young man. I think I was 22, 23 when I did it. But as I did it, I went, well, I never read the man. I know his stuff, mainly because I was on something called Reach for the Top when I was a nerdy child in high school, which was a quiz show, a national TV quiz show. And so I knew stuff like, and titles of books and Dubliners, Finnegans Wake, and things like that, and Ulysses. But I had never read anything or never had any interest. But I thought when I did that picture, I said, well, maybe you should. And so I did start a portrait of the artist, and then kind of dead-ended in the middle of it, more or less around the priest's perorations about hell and that beyond me. Anyway, so I didn't really finish it. But anyway, one day, however, it was my first trip to Dublin, which was 1989, and I was wandering down the one of the Wellington Quay in Dublin, which probably if you've been to Dublin.
No. But I have Ulysses in my head. Close.
Yeah, well, you go. Anyway, I was there in Dub and wandering down the Wellington Quay. And Wellington Quay is to the west of the monument, Parnell Street, and it's just Wellington Quay is just where something called the Halfpenny Bridge exists. The Halfpenny Bridge is an old pedestrian bridge that was built in sort of the mid 1800s. I was looking in this bookstore on the quay, on the Wellington Quay, and I saw this book in the shop window, which is, you can't really see it, or maybe, but is a picture of a man. Sort of a sepia tone photograph from roughly 1904 of a man crossing the Halfpenny Bridge with his back, looking at the man's back as he crosses the Halfpenny Bridge. And then I looked to my looked to my right, and there was the Halfpenny Bridge. And I said, oh shit, I've got to buy this book just for that. And so that was this is my first, I've got 3 copies now, but this is my first very tattered copy of the much pilloried Ireland edition. And that was where I started to read Ulysses on the boat going across from Ireland to Wales and subsequently to London. And that was the beginning, my real beginning of my passion for James Joyce, was this serendipitous stumbling upon this book cover, and then looking behind me and saying, or side to side, and saying, that's the cover of the book. So and I'd always thought about the book, but I never bothered to read it, and started to read it and went, oh my God, I love this book. So that was so even though the picture, the sketch that I did was sort of dallying with the concept of Joyce, this is the only time I really dived into it. And then subsequently I read it, and I read or reread, I suppose, all of Portrait of the Artist and Dubliners and the poems and Exiles, and I have dipped my toe into the Wake, but I've never I've read more about the Wake than I have read the Wake. I have 3 books about the Wake. But,
wow.
but I've never read the whole text. have a big one solid bookshelf that's all Joyce stuff. It's just
Wow.
yeah,
Oh, amazing.
collector's things that I found in bookstores. So there's 3 biographies of Joyce. There's a biography of Sylvia Beach. There's the biography of Nora. There's the
Mhm.
biography of Joyce's daughter, Lucia.
Lucia.
There's tons of critical books. There's comic books. There's all kinds of shit. So uh,
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Wow.
I
That's
probably have about 50 books about Joycean stuff, and including editions of Joyce, like
mhm.
editions of
That's
there's
amazing.
3 editions of Ulysses, and then the rest of them are all more or less single editions of the other books.
Uh,
I've never read Stephen Hero. That's the one I have never looked at, never found.
why not, do you think? Just
Uh, I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. I just didn't bother. It was more. I Well, I was never sure what it was. I was never sure what is Stephen Hero. Just is it a separate book? Was it the sort of the notes for a portrait? Was it a manuscript that was sort of a trial manuscript, and then the real manuscript was the portrait? Or
hmm.
I always sort of regarded it as a nice to do rather than a need to do in terms of Stephen Hero, anyway. And there are many scholars that at conferences will write about it.
Okay.
Anyway, but I've never actually cracked it. So then in in 1993,
Mhm.
more or less, I guess 4 years after I had stumbled onto this genius, I decided I was going to take a sabbatical from my work, and so I decided to spend 4 months in Europe following James Joyce, broadly speaking, sort of
Okay.
going to all the places that he lived. All of them. Yeah, I went to all of them. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Anyway, except I missed when during the war he left Paris and went south. Can't remember where. In the middle of France somewhere, maybe Lyon, and then subsequently there to Zurich. But anyway, went everywhere else. I went to Rome. I went to Dublin. I went to Paris. I went to Pula,
Mhm.
Trieste. I guess that's all.
Wow.
In Ireland, I was in the West, where
Mhm.
Nora was. I was in Donegal. So some of it was following Joyce. Some of it was just sort of doing stuff on my own. I studied Irish for 2 weeks in Northern Ireland, in Ulster. I did a French course for a month in Montpellier, and and just kind of, and I went to places that had nothing to do with Joyce whatsoever, like Barcelona and Vienna and Munich,
Mhm.
Brussels, Bruges, a few other places that had bugger all to do with Joyce, but it was part of the trip. So I did 4 months sort of wandering rocks, so to speak, in Europe, and that was a tremendous experience,
Wow.
and it was very moving. It was
Mhm.
extraordinarily moving for me.
Pilgrimage.
Yeah, it was a pilgrimage, and it was very much a pilgrimage. And I've subsequently done other pilgrimages not related to Joyce, but although on that trip I also did a pilgrimage to my other favorite writer, which is W.H. Auden, and I went to his grave.
Wow.
His grave is just outside of Vienna, so I visited that while I was there. Again, bugger to do with Joyce, but I
Had to
went
do
to
with
Zurich,
Autumn. Mhm.
went to visit the grave, and I went to the institute. And my experience with Joyce um, is in sort of 3 ways. One is through the excitement of the literature. The second is physically to follow him
Okay.
into various places, and that includes physically following him through the Joyce Symposia, because
Mhm.
there's the 28th Joyce International James Joyce Symposia takes place in Dublin in June. It's always
Mhm.
in Bloom Week, and and this one's in Dublin, which is
Mhm.
the second time I've been there. I was there in 2004 for the 100th anniversary of Bloom's Day.
Oh, amazing.
That was where it was then. But I've been to ones in London. I've been to Prague. I've been to Budapest, Buffalo. Where else? God. Tours in France.
Mhm.
I can't remember all the bloody places I've been. Oh, Trieste,
Amazing.
twice,
Trieste.
theoretically.
Wow.
Anyway, it's every 2 years, and
Mhm.
it's always somewhere in Europe, and it's an opportunity for independent scholars like me, or autodidacts, or
Mhm.
fans, if you want to put it down to that, to come and sometimes to give papers, actually.
Wow.
Um,
Have you
yeah,
given any
I have
papers?
not. No, I wrote one, but was sort of suggested that it wasn't a great idea or paper, and so I wisely or timorously decided not to do it. But
Mhm.
which was the premise of it was, in Ithaca, Bloom says in one of the questions towards the end, divorce? Question mark. I think not, or something like that. It was sort of a,
Mhm.
you know, the rumination of, should he, being a cuckold, decide to, and said no. And I said, and so it was sort of on the premise of, well, what if he said yes? What would the divorce trial between Mrs. Marion Bloom and Mr. Leopold Bloom actually look like, and how might it transpire, and what would the law at the time be used, and how might it have been argued, and how might it have been decided? But that sort of took me into the territory of visiting the fictional home of the fictional father of a fictional character. Um, anyway, Mike Groden was a very good friend of mine. The um, the luminous expert of Joycean sort of genetic scholarship.
Okay.
The various notebooks and fair copies and etc. of
Mhm.
various writings, and he's the guy who the Irish Library called upon when a whole range of Joycean material came to the fore to validate that it was real, that it was legit.
Wow.
And so he's a very famous scholar in terms of the how, much as the how of Joyce's work as much as what he produced. So
Mhm.
looking at the genetic scholarship, that was his big thing. Anyway, Michael's a friend of mine, and I asked him, suggested this to him, and he said, I don't know. I said, okay.
Oh, no.
Anyway, so no, I haven't given a paper, but someday I may. I may still give that
Yeah.
stupid paper, or I may do something else. I don't know. So there's so I talked about three things for me.
Mhm.
One
Yeah.
is the text itself and the
Mhm.
studies of the text, which is generally through the Joyce Symposium.
Mhm.
The traveling with Joyce, which is both my own little journey to Dublin, etc., as well as traveling to these various conferences. So it's the physical act of actually visiting and enjoying and doing stuff, the reading, the thinking, the doing. And then the third one is the writing, because I'm a writer,
Mhm.
and every writer is indebted to those who go before them in some way or another.
Mhm.
You could say that every thought I have is original, but it's not. Uh,
Mhm.
and so the first novel that I wrote was very much, as some people do, as a homage to Joyce, and not so much in the sense of copying the text or the story, but the structure of
Mhm.
of how it worked to a certain degree. And then it begins, stately, plump, something or other. That was so there's little things that you do to kind of honor the patron, if you will, or the honor
Okay.
the one who set you on your way. Auden has a phrase where, to point our knowledge on its way, o da quod jubis domine, which is from the New
Oh.
Year. Uh, and in many ways, Ulysses specifically, but the other books too,
Mhm.
point my knowledge on its way. Sort of say, this is a trope you could use. This is a structure you could use. This is a line
Mhm.
you might write. And so I've written a lot of short stories. I've written 3 novels and poems and other sorts of things. And I always have Joyce in mind in a weird way.
Okay.
Not because I have anything even approaching his brilliance, if you will, but just because he made me want to write. So,
Ah,
and I think lots of writers will say that, those who are indebted
mhm.
to Joyce. The problem, of course, with it is that you read this book and you say, "Holy shit! How am I ever going to write anything as brilliant as this?" Um, and there's people like Martin Amis and Thomas Pynchon and others have felt the same thing, but said, "Oh, the hell with it! I'm just going to write my book."
Yeah, they did. It's funny you bring up Pynchon because I think the moment that I realized, okay, maybe I'll be able to not write like Ulysses, but write about Ulysses or study
Yeah.
Ulysses, is I accidentally got myself into two book clubs at the same time, and one was for Ulysses and one was for Gravity's Rainbow. And
Oh,
in
wow. Oh,
comparison, like reading those two at the same time, like Ulysses for once was the easy one.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's
so that
true.
was.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's funny. That's very true, actually. Each of this, I was going over my notes from my trip back in 1993, which is God, nearly 30 years ago. Um, I found a picture of myself. Oh, no, it's not here. It's in another book. But anyway, and I went, "Good Lord, was I ever that young?" And this was my notes, that I wrote at James, Nora, and Giorgio Joyce's graves, because they're all buried together
Mhm.
in Flunter, which is a cemetery just sort of, well, more, it's inside Zurich now, but at the time it was sort of on the outskirts on a hill. And this is what I'd written, and it says a lot about the perspective that I had on Joyce. A quintet of gardeners tossing shovel loads of dirt at each other. Strange frivolity in a cemetery, but then this is James Joyce's resting place. In some ways, he would have enjoyed the scene, the marriage of comedy and tragedy played out before a scene of beauty and death. The language is spoken, the Helvetian melange of German, Italian, and French, order, frivolity, and culture tied up in a bouquet of tongues. I lay a more floral bouquet on his grave, bought at a store, which advertised them as Blumenstrauss. I had to buy them with that appellation. Actually, I made a detour and got on the number 6 tram, but then remembered my need for flowers and got off, and I'm glad I did, because I also bought a small bottle of very cheap white wine. I would have bought Fondant de Sillon, which was Joyce's favorite wine, if it were available, but it wasn't. I flipped the top with my Swiss Army knife and poured some on Joyce's grave. He loved white wine. A black bird flies over his statue to alight on the grave. Looks like a dark, overfed robin. A lizard suns himself on the statue's left shoe. Pale blue rhododendrons in full bloom, like those I once saw in Connacht, near where uh, Nora was born. A pale green shrub next to the statue. Joyce stares into the future, pensively opposite from the book in his hand, as if that was then and there is the future. An inspiration. I trundle the I trundle the empty wine bottle from its resting place in my satchel over to the gardener's water tap a few feet away. I fill it and add some of the floral life which came with the bouquet. And I return to the grave and place my flowers, yellow roses and blue flowers, adorned with fern, more Swedish than Irish, but I didn't really think of green, white, and red in the vase. Once destined for the vase, once destined for the rubbish bin, now serves as an Irishman's repository for beauty. Not unlike Ulysses, The wine is the Belle Horizon, la Côte Vin Fin du Pays de Vaud. I write on the label, to Joyce from an admirer, too ashamed to write my name, but too proud to leave it blank. A juniper tree nearby, backed by what looks like a dogwood, zinnias around the statue, Irish clover surrounds the gray stone. I retrace my salutation on the bottle, wanting my admiration to become visible. James Augustine Joyce. I struggle for a line from his works and settle on Gabriel Conroy's last thoughts, better pass boldly into that great world than to fade and wither dismally with age. And then, yes, the final word of Ulysses, the most positive word in the English language. Hear, hear, Joyce, hear, hear. Look kindly on me, Mr. Joyce, as you often showed your avuncular side to Arthur Power or James Stephen or even Flann O'Brien. I hope that you're comfortable where you rest, though I'm sure that heaven is an uneasy place for you, more prison than paradise, more gaol than Gloria, and yet you, still accompanied by a simple, strong, sagacious partner, I assume you're not bound by the gates of paradise any more than your mind was bound by penury, war, censorship, vice, or Ireland. A new book still glistens in the awakening mind. I hope that it will be written. Maybe it will be written by me. I will return bearing this gift, which is more substantial than this cheap bottle of plonk and a bundle of posies. It will be a book, and it will be mine, ours, Mauer's, but it will be as a shadow upon the cave wall. For you, and though you will be upset, one other are the light. I am merely the player who dances after you, reflecting but not shining. Yours is the bright, constant star. I shoot for the moon. That's what I wrote when I was sitting at Joyce's grave back in May 1993. So that says it all about my perspective on Joyce. And I had not read that in 30 years. So
wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing
well,
it with me.
it was funny. I was sitting there thinking, well, I should probably find my journals from there, and I'd found that piece. And there were other things. I mean, I went. There's another piece in it about when I was in Trieste and trying to find the place that he lived, and found the place, and I was pissed off that there was no plaque. There was nothing to honor the fact that had lived there. And I was really pissed off about this. And I was getting very emotional about it. And then I looked up and went, oh, there it is. It's about 2 meters above my head. And then went into the bar and was talking to the people in the bar in broken Italian. And it was a lovely little bit that I wrote for the Globe and Mail once upon a time. But anyway.
Wow.
Yeah. So So that was my Joycean adventure. And then of course this year I'm going to go to Dublin in June, and I don't participate. I'm not really participating. Well, I'm participating as an audience member. Really, it's an important thing for me, as you can see from that somewhat purple prose.
No, I love it, and I think much with Joyce, I think I don't know, when people were responding to Ulysses, and especially I think to like Stephen's guilt about his mom, I think Joyce didn't realize how many people would like that would hit hard and quite close to home. And I feel like a lot of the things that you wrote about Joyce, I think, have that similar experience. I think to me, like especially that image of like the wine bottle where you're like too proud to leave it, like not write anything on the bottle, but like too ashamed to put your name. I think that is like such a Joyce fan experience where there is this sort of like secretness where you want to keep it close, but also you want to tell the world. It's difficult. But I think it's a lot of I'm glad to know that is like a shared experience.
Well, and it's also the experience of that was like, it was almost like that was my Stephen life. But the Bloom life is more fervent and more deeper and richer. The Stephen life was all the life of the head and not much of the heart, and it was also very self-referential. He was young and dumb and smart in certain ways, but dumb in the in the ways of the world, and dumb in the way of dealing with one's emotions and experiencing things and stuff. Whereas Bloom was a deeper soul, was a woefully broken soul in some ways, in terms of grief and cuckoldry and business failure, if you will, and very much an everyman, and one becomes that more often than one becomes the Stephen. And you discover that as a writer as well as a reader. So my reading experience of Joyce has changed substantially within that context of once upon a time I was Stephen and going on this magical trip and being a young guy and exploring these important things and wondering why people didn't think it was important, and then now I would view it as, you bloody idiot. But I admire your perspicacity, but good God, why don't you just sit down and write rather than buggering around? I did write a bucket when I was there, so there you go. But anyway, so Bloom appeals to me far more now, especially that now that I visited his father's birthplace, and he appeals to me far more than ever before, because I'm now Bloom. I'm that guy who quotes stats and facts and makes shit up, and also experiences love and lust and doubt and sadness and being wanting to be and kindness, as well as being shunned by the group, and the FOMO to a certain extent, and also the reality of solitude, and for that matter, the reality of being with someone that you love, however colored that love may be. That's why Joyce is far more important to me now than before, because it's the difference between the sort of the early wisdom and knowledge. There was lots of knowledge in my earlier days, but there wasn't a lot of wisdom. There's lots of knowledge in Stephen, but not a lot of wisdom. Where Bloom fakes his knowledge in some cases, but there's tons of wisdom there, and also generosity towards the young Daedalus, and urinating together in the night, and just sort of this paternalist kind of approach that you just sort of say, that's me now, and I get that now, because I didn't get that when I was young. It was just this goofy old man, whereas now you just say, well, that I have met the enemy and he is me.
Wow.
That's from Doonesbury. Experience of Joyce is the text, the experience of his life, my writing that came from it, and then also that his text in some ways led me to other modernist writers.
Okay.
And so that it led me to read Camus, it led me to read Proust, it led me to read Mrs. Dalloway, Wolfe, Ford Madox Ford, Hemingway, lots of both American and French and European writers, generally, broadly speaking. Witold Gombrowicz was a Polish writer.
Wow.
Whole range of other things. And so it kind of led me to that, in the sense of saying, well, this is the modernist, then who are the other modernists? And I just, last year, I guess, I read La Recherche de Temps Perdu in English, obviously, because my French isn't that good. And that was an experience where I kept seeing all kinds of Joycean things in this text. Have you read?
I have not.
Last time? Yeah, well, there's all kinds of Joycean stuff in it, and I kept
Okay.
thinking, and I don't know if you know the story about Joyce meeting with Proust.
No.
Uh, we met with Proust once. My commonplace book of all knowledge. And look, just opened right to the page. 18th of May, 1922, the British writer and translator Sidney Schiff hosted a dinner party for 40 at Paris's Majestic Hotel. And the guests included Picasso and Stravinsky and Joyce and Proust. Joyce arrived late and drunk. Picasso and Stravinsky arrived on time and not drunk. Joyce was anxious over his lack of formal attire, evening wear, because he'd had to throw on a sort of a tweed jacket and he felt that he would stand out. Proust, in contrast to Joyce's shabbiness, arrived at 2:30 a.m., immaculately dressed in white gloves, silk scarf, and a flowered buttonhole. Proust was said to have uttered 4 famous words to Joyce, the only time they ever spoke, which was, "Do you like truffles?" To which Joyce replied, "Yes, I do." These were the only words they shared, and Proust was dead 4 months later. So,
Oh my God.
that was my opportunity to find this syncretistic linking to 2 great writers. Do you like truffles? Yes, I do. Marvelous. Well, I guess we'll both go off now and write our damn books.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So that's one of my favorite stories. Is you expect, oh, we're waiting for this explosion of titans, these opportunities to get together. What would they say? What would you do? How would you record it? Well, you wouldn't get much.
No, I gotta say that tops. Usually, my favorite story about Joyce is when he met, or I should say, when F. Scott Fitzgerald met Joyce. I don't know if you
I don't know.
I've got to say the Proust one beats it in my opinion, but Fitzgerald is my second favorite now. They met at with Sylvia Beach at Shakespeare and Company, and you know that the wives were there and all that good time, and Fitzgerald showed up so drunk on champagne and genuflected to Joyce, out of his mind. And then my favorite part, offered to throw himself out of the window as a sign of respect for Joyce. And Joyce had to be like, "No, thank you. Don't do that.
Jump out the window for me."
Yeah, don't put that on my
head.
If
you want. Well, yeah. I mean, that makes mine. Yeah, I could see myself doing something stupid like that. And we were having a discussion at a dinner party, and we were saying, who would you want to invite to your dinner party? Mm-hmm. And I said blah 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 and blah, and they said no James Joyce. I said, oh God, no, he'd be a poisonous son of a bitch.
Just ruin the party.
He's not a nice man. I mean, he might have been good if he was singing.
Yeah, just let him do his thing. Be the entertainment, maybe.
If there was a chance to do some singing, he'd be all right. But other than that, no, you wouldn't at a party. Good God, wasn't that nice a man? I wouldn't want Hemingway or Virginia Woolf or any of those people at a party. I want somebody fun. Anyway,
I love that.
A Milne at a party before I'd have Joyce. At least he could do little rhyming poems about Piglet. Joyce would just complain about the wine and bum me for money. I have a realistic perspective on Mr. Joyce. In no way am I still sort of glassy-eyed over his genius. Although, routinely I read a piece of it, or read a passage and just say, "Good God, this man was a good freaking writer."
Yeah. Sometimes I find that. Yeah. Oh, too much. I started slowly building up the tradition of all my friends get together and read The Dead on January 6th because that's Epiphany and all of that. Yeah. But I do find, I always go into it being, that's okay. This year it's just a story. And it's always a different line every year, but there's always a line that just gets you. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, but
I found that with, now that, and especially now that I read, especially the later stories in Dubliners, because it was written in that form where he, the childhood and then moving through youth and then near adulthood and then getting older, and that was, I thought, genius. But the older pieces, is it Counterparts? No, it's not Counterparts. Anyway,
I'd cry at the end of Counterparts every time. I don't.
Yeah, is that what? Anyway, I can't.
There's also A Little Cloud. Also gets me every time. Okay.
Yeah, it's just little moments of utter sublime genius, and you just say this is. Although there's always that discussion: is it beautiful or is it sublime? I don't know. Both to me.
Okay.
The sublimity is supposed to be something that is awe-inspiring and visually, like a mountain is sublime, but a small flower would be beautiful. And I don't know, I view that as sublime to those just bits of those, and even the most violent little parts of it.
Counterparts.
That's Counterparts. Yeah, that's what I thought. It shocked me when I read it, and I seldom get shocked by literature, but that shocked me. I went, holy shit. And yet it was so bloody real.
Yes.
And that was anyway, I have different emotional experiences with it. Like Ulysses to me is a book about love. It's not a book about the journey through Dublin necessarily. It's a comedy at the end of it all. It ends, it ends with a marriage in a sort.
I love that.
It ends with the bride saying yes, or renewing her renewing her bonds with her husband as yes. And to me, it ends with a very long soliloquy, but it's ultimately a marriage of two in the bed, admittedly pointing in different directions, but that's fun. They all do that. And then The Wake, The Wake, I think, is the book of all knowledge, and it's almost like I'm afraid to read it because I think I'm going to discover the key to the universe is here somewhere into this. And dear God, what am I going to do after I've read that?
Yeah. Well, that's okay if it's the whole after Giambattista Vico, right, is The Wake, so around and around and it never ends, sort of thing. So when you get to the end, just flip back to the beginning.
And then you start back to the beginning. Yeah, exactly. That is a very Baconian kind of I think that's true. Yeah.
Actually, I have a copy of Vico's New Science, and the back blurb says, this is the basis of Finnegans Wake. That's like how it's kind of this weird thing where it's going back, and the Wake is selling New Science, and New Science is selling the Wake. And
somebody told me you don't read the Wake, you sing the Wake. Tom Bishop was a professor at Florida State, I think, or something like that, and he's sort of an expert on the Wake. And he wrote this book called Joyce's Book of the Dead, which is used by lots of scholars, or cited by lots of scholars. He's a brilliant lecturer as well as a decent guy, and that was what he told me. He said, you don't read the Wake, you sing the Wake. And the other thing he said is, if it's a circle, you could theoretically start anywhere. So you don't really need to start, river run past the blah blah blah. You just go, hey, I could go, boom, start here, and then eventually you'll come around to it, to that point. That was funny in a way. And I've done that a few times where I just sort of open it at random and then read a chapter or read 10 pages or whatever, just to sort of see if I get something out of it. But it's sort of like reading the Torah or something. You just kind of say, I'm going to read, I'm going to just sort of flip through the thing, stop here and find some kind of cynosure, some sort of bright light that shines out at me.
Wow.
It seldom does. But anyway, so it's been on my list to read read the Wake, and at one point I would read sort of 5 pages a day, and then I would do my exercises, and then I would take my vitamins, and it was sort of like a thing you have to do. But I gradually gave that. Anyway,
That's okay.
someday.
Yeah.
It's not nonsense.
No.
It's nonsense. But it's almost like you cannot read this book until you have a deeper understanding of other languages, world fiction, world religions, and philosophies. And that's what I always felt. I could go through it and I might pick up this or that German reference.
Yeah.
But it's almost like I have to learn German as well as French, as well as Persian, as well as Hindu and
Latin
Urdu,
and Greek, Irish,
Latin, Greek, Norwegian, in order to really understand the jokes. And in some cases, or the puns, or and in some cases, it's a multiple pun. It'll be a pun in Norwegian. It's also a pun in English. It's also a pun in. And it's like, holy shit! How could he possibly have come up with this? And how am I possibly supposed to understand it? And the best thing, have you been to the Joyce Symposium?
No, hopefully this year.
Hopefully, yeah, I hope you do. There's always a close reading group of the Wake and Ulysses at every, so where they take a section, they take a passage, and they read it as a group, and then discuss it. And you might not get more than about a page and a half in the entire week.
Wow.
But you meet every day, usually around lunchtime. You meet every day as a group, and you can come in and drop out if you want to be part of it. And some of the greatest Joyce scholars in the world are sitting in this thing. But there's also schmoes like me that are just interested observers who will also throw out the odd moment of eclat or genius or epiphany, and they also go, I never thought of that. It's this sort of amalgam of people from all over the world and of all different disciplines and all levels of expertise that are just excited about reading the Wake. And so you read it almost like biblical scripture, going through it line by line, word by word, and some line by line. And then it's sort of like they read the line, and then somebody just talks about it, and then they talk a bit more, and then they say, well, let's move on to the next line, and then you read that line. So it's a very close reading of a text, but it's enormous fun. For people like me, it's great fun. And I'm sure some of the Joyceans, it's a little, you'll find they're an exceptionally competitive bunch.
Okay.
There's tons of politics in the Joyce community, believe me. I've seen fist fights at Joyce. Oh yeah. So there's wars that go on, and there's always a good drunk.
Well, it has to be. Of course, someone has to be representative.
Oh yeah, and that's the best part of the Joyce concept, or as they call them, the Joyce Symposia, is they'll have there's always a banquet, which is overclosed, whatever. There's always a banquet, and then you sing the songs in Joycean songs. So you have to sing Old Sweet Song and those pretty little maids, and they're a lot of fun. Like, that's the thing. The weird thing about the Joyces is they're a lot of fun. Sometimes they're very stuffy and cold and tough to get to know. But then you have a drink or two, and you realize music was as important to Joyce as the text was. And so there's always a sing song. There's usually a good knees up, some sort of a party, or not organized, but just happens.
Oh, yeah.
There's often a good mudslinging argument, or some sort of a fight. Often between the gobblers and the non-gobblers over.
I'm a non. I'll be, if I'm there, I'm ready to throw fists against him. But
I started with the Gobbler edition and then moved over to the Randomos, and I have So there's always little fights that go on over that, and then there's. I don't know. It's funny. It's a good bunch. And even if you're not really I always feel on the margins of it because I'm not an academic. I'm a writer, but I'm not an academic. And but you meet really fascinating people, and you meet a lot of people who are non-academic Joyceans, who are experts in their own weird little field, and are acknowledged as such. And so so it's not a really toffee nosed sort of, oh no, you can't play in our park because you're not a PhD. It's fairly open to people of all, stripes, like myself. And there's this woman who was an expert on music and Joyce and music. She was a teacher from somewhere in California or something. And there's another guy who had a Joycean reading group in Miami, and he runs a bail bonds office.
What? That's insane. So, wow, I love that.
He went with us to Zambate. That's how I met him. And there's a woman she's translating Finnegans Wake into Catalan. Wow. She lives in Barcelona. And so she's hilariously fun. And anyway, there's some really nice people, and there's some, not nice people, and it's always fun. It's never dull, just as Joyce was never dull. That's been my experience of this extraordinarily brilliant, funny, acerbic, not very pleasant as a human being, but enormous fun. That's the other thing. A lot of great writers show up at the symposium just to talk. So that's where I met Haney. Seamus Haney came to 2004.
Really?
That was extraordinary. It was like meeting your idol. It's like,
yeah, I wouldn't know what to say.
Oh, I know exactly. I was the same. But Umberto Eco came, early on because he was a big Joyce guy. John Banfield came a couple of years ago with his book, and they're just there to give a lecture. Sometimes they just participate in discussions. Billy Collins, poet, came when we were, so it's just fun. You always meet somebody that's interesting, and even if you don't, you just say, "Oh, the hell with it." I'm gonna go off to the pub.